The sound of rushing water filled the air as I stood ankle-deep in a puddle that had no business being there, staring at where my main water line had been neatly cut and patched with duct tape. A laminated sign read, "Unauthorized Water Use HOA Enforcement." The kicker? The HOA had no authority over my property. But Karen didn't know that. What she also didn't know was that I'm the guy who built the water system her house relies on. And now she's made the biggest mistake of her life. It all started when I came back from a peaceful 3-day fishing trip. Once a month I go, fully off-grid, no phone, no internet. Just nature, trout, and a cooler full of sandwiches. But as soon as I got home and tried to fill the dog bowls, I noticed there was no water pressure. Hose nothing. Sinks dry. I walked the property and found the problem at the fence line. My main water pipe had been deliberately cut and capped. Fresh tire tracks and boot prints told the story. There was even HOA branded tape and a smug flyer announcing with passive-aggressive cheer that unauthorized irrigation systems using shared groundwater were being shut down per neighborhood ordinance. Except, my 47-acre ranch isn't in the HOA. Never has been, not on any deed, lease, or county file. And that pipe they cut? It's mine. Built it myself in '93 with a rented backhoe. The nerve. I checked the rest of my land, no other damage. But I did recognize the tire tracks. A silver Lexus SUV. And one of the boot prints had a distinct broken heel. Rhinestone-studded sandals. Only Karen wears those things to do yard work. She's the kind of person who thinks being on the HOA board makes her a deputy mayor. So I did what any level-headed rancher would do. I documented everything, took photos, and strolled back to my barn, whistling. Not because I was pleased, but because I held a trump card Karen didn't know about. Years ago, when the HOA development was being built, the developers struck a deal with me. Rather than paying the city for water infrastructure, they paid me to extend my water line to service their 30 homes. In return, they agreed to maintain their own pump and pay a small fee. The deal's buried in county records and the lease expired a decade ago, but the water still flows. My water from my reservoir. And now they've cut me off? Oh, sweet irony. Karen probably marched back to the HOA meeting, patting herself on the back for dealing with the rogue rancher. She probably gave a whole speech about safety and compliance, maybe handed out gold stars. But what she really did was give me the green light. Back in my barn, hidden behind some hay bales, there's an old breaker box. 3 switches. One for irrigation. One for the pressure valve. And one, labeled in faded pencil as backup flow gate, controls the entire HOA water system. I flipped it. With a single flick, 29 homes, a clubhouse, and 2 ornamental fountains went dry. By that evening, I could hear Karen yelling from 4 houses away. The Johnsons' pool was draining. The Millers had a serial clogged toilet, someone called a plumber, and then someone else called the county. I just sat on my porch, beer in hand, watching sprinkler heads sputter and die across the cul-de-sac. Thing is, I hadn't been looking for revenge, at least not at first. But when someone slices your waterline without permission, slaps a smug little sign on it, and tries to fine you for it, after you've spent decades maintaining the very system that lets their lawns thrive, well, that makes it personal. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was making a power play, trying to assert control over a man who'd long ago walked away from politics and bureaucracy. What she didn't realize, though, was that control only matters if the other side doesn't. Have the valve. And I did. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the first panicked HOA emails hit inboxes, I leaned back on my porch, tipped my hat, and whispered to my dog, who was now happily drinking from a fresh pail pulled from the well. Let the games begin. By sunrise, the cracks were already showing. Karen's precious Willow Creek, her picture-perfect neighborhood she micromanaged like a kingdom, was starting to unravel. Sprinklers stayed silent, fountains sputtered. Early risers stood confused at their sinks, twisting dry taps. The group chat lit up, first confusion, then frustration. Karen responded with vague reassurances, pretending everything was under control. But by mid-morning, her own lawn was curling brown at the edges, and her koi pond was starting to look more like soup. I meanwhile sat in the shade with a cup of coffee and binoculars, watching the chaos unfold like a live soap opera. Karen stormed from house to house, clipboard in hand, barking orders. I watched her kick over a garden gnome in a huff and nearly slip on yesterday's overwatered sidewalk. She even tried blaming poor Mrs. Dawson for unauthorized water use, though there was no water to be found. Then she pointed toward my land, gesturing wildly like I was the villain in her self-written drama. I figured it was time for a stroll, so I headed down to the gate that separated my ranch from the cul-de-sac, just to enjoy the view. Of course, Karen saw me and made a beeline, storming over like a thundercloud in heels. Her face was already red when she yelled, "You shut off the water, didn't you?" "I know it was you." I stayed calm. "Me? I've just been out here minding my business. Maybe your board cut the wrong pipe when they hacked into my land." Her face faltered. You could see the doubt creep in. She'd been so busy trying to flex her authority that it hadn't occurred to her she'd made a huge mistake. "You were stealing water from the HOA system," she snapped. "That pipe was illegal. I fixed it." "Oh, you mean the pipe I laid down before your HOA even existed? The one that runs from my reservoir, built back in '93? Karen blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no answer because she didn't actually know. She'd just assumed she was in charge. She tried again. "Then why does the HOA lose water when your valve is off?" "Because your HOA never built its own system. You've been using mine for years. You were supposed to renew the lease. You didn't. So technically, your entire neighborhood is trespassing on my infrastructure. Every drop that flows through that pipe, I own it. You're bluffing. County records say otherwise." "You should really check the records sometime," I told her, "right next to the zoning paperwork that says your authority ends exactly at that decorative hedge." Karen just stared, gears turning behind her eyes as she tried to process everything. That silence, worth every brown lawn and dry flower bed she'd now have to answer for. By lunchtime, the HOA group chat had erupted into full-blown chaos. Screenshots were being sent to me by David, a quiet neighbor who always waved when I passed. He wasn't a Karen fan. She'd once fined him for planting an apple tree in his front yard, said it wasn't on the approved flora list, and made him rip it out. Now he was gleefully feeding me her meltdown in real time. Residents were panicking. Kids cried when the splash pad dried up. People were openly questioning the HOA's leadership. Someone even floated the idea of dissolving it altogether. A few desperate folks tried hiring plumbers. One even brought in a rented water truck to refill their house tank. None of it worked. They were all realizing the truth. The neighborhood's water came from one source, mine. And without my pump running, their whole system was just dry pipe and wishful thinking. Later that day, a silver pickup rolled into my driveway. A plumber sent by the HOA. He stepped out politely. "Sir, I'm just here to check on a main line. Someone asked me to reconnect, but looking at the pipe and the markers, I'm guessing this is your land?" "You guessed right," I said. "And that pipe's mine too. Touch it without permission and I'll have to file trespass charges." He tipped his cap and smiled. "No worries, sir. I won't touch a thing. Not my first HOA mess. I'll mark it inaccessible and bill them for the visit." I liked him already. Handed him a cold soda and we sat on the porch for a few. He told me stories. Turns out this wasn't even his worst HOA call this month. The real kicker came later that evening when I checked my mailbox. Inside, a formal HOA violation. Notice: $10,000 fine for unauthorized irrigation access. Signed by none other than Karen. I took the letter inside, laid it on my desk and started typing. Not to the HOA board, but to each homeowner in Willow Creek. A clear, professional letter that explained everything. The history of the system, the expired lease, the fact that their water came from my reservoir, and that the HOA had never renewed the agreement. I offered a reasonable monthly fee to restore access, with one condition. Karen had to resign. At dawn, I walked the sidewalks and delivered each letter by hand, one per doorstep. Calm, methodical. Each envelope addressed by name. No threats, no drama, just facts and a solution. Water could return, lawns could recover. But only if Karen gave up her clipboard throne. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't looking for apologies. I just gave them a choice. I was halfway through feeding the chickens when I heard the first voice tear through the morning stillness. Karen, she, was already yelling at a neighbor, letter clutched like it was a court summons, phone in her other hand as if she was calling the president. She marched up and down the cul-de-sac, flailing and shrieking about blackmail and legal threats. Some neighbors looked unsure at first. That was expected. Change doesn't come easy in a place like Willow Creek. But then my phone buzzed. The first voicemail was from Mr. Langley on the east side, a calm, polite man. He thanked me for the clarity, said he and his wife would happily pay the fee if it meant water returned. Then came another message, from a woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. She told me she'd had enough of the HOA's nonsense, sick of being fined for trivial things like her car barely touching the curb. And Karen? Karen had finally pushed her too far. She said she was ready to support my offer. I sat in my office, sipping coffee, listening to voicemails roll in until my inbox was full. Word had spread. The residents were starting to organize. I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen tried to shut it down. Sure enough, that afternoon she called an emergency HOA meeting. She blasted a neighborhood-wide text and sent out printed flyers door to door, summoning everyone to the clubhouse for what she claimed was a critical water systems update. I couldn't resist. I cleaned up, threw on a button-up, and headed down to the clubhouse. Not as a speaker, just a quiet observer in the back. And what I saw was beautiful. Karen stood at the front, sweat beading on her forehead, mascara smudged from either stress or rage, or both. She launched into a frantic speech claiming my water shutoff was an act of aggression, accusing me of extortion. She called me a liar, a saboteur, and even said I forged the documents in my letters. She insisted she had legal experts on her side and everything was under control. Then the best part happened. Tran, a quiet, soft-spoken resident who rarely said anything during meetings, stood up. He cleared his throat and calmly said he had reviewed the documents I'd shared. Turns out he's a retired land use attorney. Not only did he confirm everything I wrote, but he also pointed out that the HOA had zero legal rights to the water line I installed. Worse, he said Karen's attempt to cut it off could be considered vandalism, or even criminal. Silence fell over the room. Karen's face went pale. I could see it happening right there. Her grip on control, the one she clung to through endless rules and intimidation, was slipping. People weren't whispering anymore, they were finally speaking up. Residents started asking questions. How much had she spent on those ugly decorative planters no one wanted? Why were the rules enforced so unevenly? When was the last time they'd even held a board election? It felt like a breath of fresh air was finally moving through the place. Karen scrambled to regain control, announcing a barbecue to restore unity the next evening, complete with a water truck to refill the fountains and bring back community, spirit. But it reeked of desperation. She was all performance, no substance. I didn't stop her. That morning, I quietly reopened the pressure gate, just enough to let it trickle through one spigot by the clubhouse. I wanted to see what she'd do with it. From my fence that night, I watched the barbecue unfold. Rented grills, folding chairs, warm soda. No water truck ever showed. The porta potties hadn't been serviced in days and the smell was unbearable. Then came the cherry on top. Karen had hooked up a misting fan to the only working spigot, the one I'd rerouted. It was pumping well. Water. When she turned it on, a fine mist sprayed over the crowd, smelling like rotten eggs. Someone screamed. A grill got knocked over. A kid burst into tears. The fan sputtered and died, just like the party. Karen stood there, soaked, red-faced, and speechless. The crowd dispersed, disappointed, shaking their heads. Her power? Gone. And she knew it. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. People like Karen don't go down quietly. But what she didn't realize was that the moment she cut my pipe, she triggered a chain of events she couldn't control. I hadn't even touched the backup reservoir yet. And if she pushed again, I had more than water to shut off. I had legal standing, community support, and eyes on everything now. By morning, it spread like wildfire. 3 houses had water containers on their porches with notes saying they'd signed my agreement. A 4th had a sign jammed into their dry lawn. We want real water, not HOA lies. Karen woke up to see her kingdom crumbling, one crack at a time. And like all people like her, when they feel trapped, they don't retreat. They charge ahead, loud and blind, hoping the noise will cover the collapse. To be honest, I had barely finished my coffee when I saw her again. This time, she wasn't strutting around in heels or yelling at neighbors. No, today she wore black sweatpants, an oversized hoodie, and sunglasses that nearly swallowed her face. She thought she was being subtle. But there aren't many silver Lexus SUVs with CO1 on the plates in Willow Creek. I watched from the barn as she parked, by the same fence line where she had originally cut into my water pipe. She got out, crouched low, and pulled a black toolbox from the trunk. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted to see what she was doing. Clearly, she'd abandoned any preteens of following the law. Staying in the shadows, I watched as she started digging. She had gloves on and used a small garden shovel like she was trying to sneak candy from a jar. She uncovered the damaged section from earlier and began fiddling with the connections. Then it clicked. She wasn't trying to fix it for the community. She was trying to quietly tap back into my line, stealing water without raising suspicion. I wasn't even mad, just amazed at the level of idiocy. So I called the sheriff. I explained that someone was trespassing, tampering with private utilities, and that I had footage to back it up. They said a deputy would be there shortly. Then I flipped a switch inside the barn. It activated an emergency valve I'd set up. Years ago, not for water, but for air pressure and a bright red biodegradable foam. Non-toxic, but a nightmare to clean up. Within seconds, Karen was coated in what looked like strawberry mousse. She screamed. I heard it loud and clear. She jumped back, dropped her wrench, and scrambled away from the pipe, now covered in dye. I didn't move until the sheriff's car pulled up about 15 minutes later. 2 deputies stepped out. One of them, Mason, recognized me right away and tipped his hat. Morning, Frank. Got your call. You said you've got her on video? Sure do, I said. Come take a look. Inside the barn, I played back the footage. Karen crouched on my land, tools in hand, red-handed, literally. Mason gave a low whistle and looked to his partner. Yeah, trespassing, vandalism, attempted utility theft. We can bring her in. They approached Karen calmly, still desperately wiping foam off with purse napkins. She tried to lie, claiming she was just out for a walk or inspecting community lines as an HOA official. They weren't having it. Mason told her to save it for court and asked her to follow them back in her own car. The sight of her, drenched in foam, walking toward her Lexus while neighbors peeked through curtains, that was better than any show on TV. News spread fast. Screenshots from the security footage hit the neighborhood message board within the hour. Some were shocked, others furious. Even her defenders had a hard time justifying trespassing and sabotage. One neighbor commented that Karen had just accused me of being the criminal. Another said they'd overheard her bragging about taking care of the ranch guy, like it was some heroic mission. But the real twist came when a local reporter showed up. Apparently, someone tipped off the press. A young woman named April knocked on my door and asked for a statement. I almost turned her away. I don't do interviews. But she said she'd already spoken to some of the neighbors who signed my agreement. I agreed on one condition, no spin, just facts. We stood behind the barn by the reservoir while I explained everything. The history of the system, the documents, even a demo of the backup valve that redirected flow across different parts of the neighborhood. She asked me something that stuck. Why didn't you fight back sooner? Because I wasn't at war, I said. I just wanted to be left alone. But they came onto my land, cut my pipe, and called it justice. That's not how you treat a neighbor. The story aired that night. Headline read, Rancher reclaims water rights after HOA leader accused of sabotage. Karen's name and photo were front and center, foam and all circulating on social media, along with video of her arguing with the sheriff. It sealed her fate. By sundown, over 20 households had signed onto my water agreement. One by one, valves reopened. Lawns came back to life. Sprinklers hissed, fountains bubbled, toilets flushed, except at Karen's house. I left her disconnected, not out of revenge, but principle. She'd acted like she owned everything, like she could change the rules on a whim, like she was untouchable. But the water was never hers to control. She didn't build it, didn't understand it, and had no right to take it. Now the whole neighborhood knew. The next day's HOA meeting was scheduled for 5 OGI, but by 4:30 the parking lot was packed. Clusters of people chatted quietly, many of them holding papers and occasionally glancing at Karen's house. It looked nothing like the pristine palace it once was. Her lawn was dry and patchy. Her roses wilted, and dust streaked down the once white fence. No one had seen her all day, and honestly, no one cared if she showed up. What mattered now was the vote. Inside the clubhouse, every seat was filled. The air was heavy, not with fear, but with anticipation. This wasn't just about water, anymore. It was about all the years of control, petty fines, and intimidation. And finally, people were done being silent. Karen had always been the kind of person who fined you $50 for leaving your trash bins out 10 minutes too long. The kind who banned sidewalk chalk because it didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. So this meeting wasn't just about water. It was about power, about who really got to shape the community. I stood near the back, hands in my pockets, just observing. I wasn't on the HOA, didn't have a vote, but everyone knew why I was there. Leonard, the HOA board president, a nervous guy who always looked out of place, stepped up to the small podium and tried to call the room to order. The crowd quieted, but the tension didn't. He cleared his throat and started reading from a statement. Something about unity and procedures, but no one really cared. Then he got to the part that mattered. He said that due to recent events, including unauthorized actions by a sitting board member, there was a motion to permanently remove Karen Delaney from her role. The room broke into cheers before he even finished the sentence. Then he opened the floor for discussion. One woman shared how Karen publicly shamed her for leaving her holiday lights up too long. A man spoke about being fined for repainting his fence, even though he used an approved color. One by one, people stood up and told their stories. Not a single person defended her, not even Leonard, who looked like he was sweating straight through his shirt. When it came time to vote, the result was unanimous. Every hand went up. Karen was officially removed. A decade of dominance ended in less than 10 minutes. Then something unexpected happened. Leonard turned to me and asked if I'd say a few words I hadn't planned to. I didn't want to make a speech. But everyone was looking at me, so I stepped forward, not to the podium, just stood where I was and spoke simply. I told them I wasn't there to gloat, that I hadn't cut off their water out of anger or revenge. I had just stopped giving away something that was mine. I explained how every drop came from a system I built on my own land, with my own money and labor, and all I ever wanted was to be left in peace. Then I made them an offer. I said I'd restore full water service to every household in Willow Creek. No more rationing, no more shutoffs, just clean, steady water, like it used to be. All I asked in return was a small, fair monthly fee and one simple condition. The HOA stayed off my land. No inspectors, no fines. I lived by my code and I expected the same respect I gave to others. The applause that followed wasn't loud or flashy. It was steady, genuine, like a sigh of relief. After the meeting, neighbors came up to shake my hand. Some apologized for staying silent for so long. Others just thanked me. A few asked if they could bring their kids to the ranch to see the chickens sometime. By the time I got home, the sky was dark and the stars were beginning to show. I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching sprinklers light up across their neighborhood one by one. Arcs of water spun gently under the moonlight. It was quiet, peaceful, the way things should have always been. Karen's house, of course, stayed dry. Not out of spite, just the facts. I'd sent her the same agreement I sent everyone else. No threats, no special notes. Just the offer, clear and fair. She never responded. She pulled her curtains shut and disappeared. Rumors said she was trying to sell the house, but no one wanted a property with no water and a story like hers. Her once perfect lawn had become a patch of brittle brown. Her roses were sticks, and every morning at exactly 7:30, the sprinkler on my side of the fence would kick on, just barely missing the edge of her driveway. Completely accidental, of course. Things in Willow Creek began to shift after that. The board held real elections. Rules got trimmed down. People planted the flowers they actually liked. Someone even built a little free library by the park. Life started to feel like it belonged to the people again. It didn't look like much, but it mattered. Things started to feel normal again. I stuck to my routine. Fed the animals, repaired fences, worked in the barn. The reservoir stayed full. The water kept flowing, and for the first time in ages, no one showed up at my gate with complaints or clipboards. My sign said everything. Private land, private water, respect goes both ways. I wasn't trying to win, just to be left in peace. But if anyone tried to take what I built and claim it, they'd feel the pressure, not through violence, but through facts, patience, and a quiet twist of the valve. 3 weeks had passed since the vote, and Willow Creek was finally calm. Kids rode bikes without being chased down for not wearing helmets. Neighbors smiled while walking their dogs, not ducking away from HOA scoldings. Water flowed like it used to, steady and reliable. Lawns started turning green again, and instead of complaints, I heard laughter, sprinklers, hoses, the sounds of life returning to normal. No one pretended the trouble never happened, but everyone was glad it was over. Karen hadn't shown her face. Her house stayed shut tight, blinds drawn, mailbox stuffed. Rumor was she was selling it, but no sign went up. A neighbor overheard her yelling at a real estate agent about the drop-in home value. Word got around that buyers were asking about the water rights and that video, her red-foamed meltdown going viral. The agent even offered free bottled water with the house, but no one took the bait. I moved on. Life returned to its rhythm. Chickens clucked, barn cats basked, and I kept fixing what needed fixing. But there was one thing I hadn't shared, not even with those relying on my water. It wasn't a secret, just something I held back until things settled. One late afternoon, with the sky streaked in gold, I decided it was time. Mr. Tran, the retired lawyer who spoke up at the meeting, dropped by with a pie his wife made and a draft of the new HOA charter. He asked if I'd review it. I said I wasn't interested in joining but would take a look. We sat on the porch, talked birds, irrigation and apple trees. Then I took him behind the barn, past the known reservoir, and showed him the real source. Hidden, behind vines and thyme. It was a small pump house with an old well. Nothing flashy, just a shaft, a panel, and a humming pressure tank. It tapped into a natural aquifer 42 feet down, older than the entire neighborhood. I built it after the lease expired, knowing one day I might need to remind people who really controlled the water. Mr. Tran nodded, understanding. It wasn't about power. It was about being ready, about standing firm without a badge or title. He called it the most peaceful act of resistance he'd ever seen. Not long after, a new flyer showed up on mailboxes, anonymous and full of angry capital letters, accusing me of unfair deals and pushing for the HOA to rebuild its system. Most neighbors laughed and trashed it. A few brought it to me, joking about putting up security cameras in case Karen was sneaking around again. I didn't need cameras. I had peace, and the knowledge that anyone trying to mess with my system would face consequences they weren't ready for. The final twist came when a county official visited. Polite, clipboard in hand, doing a routine check on private utilities. Someone had flagged the neighborhood's non-municipal setup. I didn't ask who, I already knew. I gave him a full tour, the reservoir, the well, the piping, the paperwork. Everything was in order. He left with a signature and a compliment. It's rare to find a setup this clean. You should teach a class. By month's end, Karen's house was emptied. A sedan followed a moving truck out of the neighborhood. She didn't wave, and no one waved back. Her name vanished from official documents, the HOA charter was rewritten, and for the first time in a decade, the community actually belonged to the residents, not someone running it with rules and fines. I replaced the old ranch gate sign with a simple wooden one. Private land, private water, mutual respect required. Some chuckled, others just nodded. And every morning, like clockwork, sprinklers clicked on. Not because I demanded it, but because I kept my promise. I never wanted a fight, I wanted quiet. I didn't want control. I wanted peace. And in the end, all it took to end the noise was a pipe, a plan, and the patience to let the truth rise with the pressure.